Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Ready?
Yep. Let's go. Let's laugh. We are imperfect after all.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Imperfect Us podcast.
I'm Leanne Camilleri.
And I'm Lisa Downs. As hosts of the Imperfect Us podcast, we share relatable stories that celebrate we are all perfectly imperfect humans, leading perfectly imperfect lives. We discover practical and evidence-based strategies that draw on the science of wellbeing and positive psychology that help us to uncover the barriers that might hold us back from being our authentic selves and turn them into opportunities so that we can show up more consistently, doing what we really aspire to do and who we want to be.
We acknowledge the Wadawurrung and the Kaurna people as traditional custodians of the beautiful lands on which this podcast is being recorded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend this respect to other First Nations people who are here with us today. So, let's get started.
Today we're speaking with the amazing Julie Weste about how the stories we tell ourselves can shape our lives and our well-being. We explore how coaching, wellbeing science and neuroscience can support us in transforming our inner narratives that are more positive and that serve us better. She's one of those rare gems who enjoys helping individuals and teams to grow and change through coaching and development services based on wellbeing science. Her curiosity and thirst for knowledge encompasses studies spanning from the south of France to Harvard Business School. She has chaired a national bi-party board and received several scholarships and awards, including Values in Action and Best Client Satisfaction. Julie is a highly accomplished coach with outstanding credentials that will blow your mind. So let's get started to today's conversation with Julie. Well, hello, Julie, and thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure, Lisa.
Julie, we would really love to hear a little bit about what led you to do the wonderful work that you are doing.
Sure. So I originally studied psychology and taught psychology for a number of years. And then that sort of paved the way for a very long career in change and transformation, where I particularly focused on and worked with people who were undergoing psychological transition. And about 9 years ago, when I was pretty exhausted with the nature of that work, my dad passed away. And it was an absolute watershed moment for me. I'd already been looking at mindfulness and meditation, and it left me sort of feeling like I needed something different, and I was feeling so lost. And so I needed something that was restorative and something that I really would be able to feel provided a real sense of meaning for me, I guess. So I went off and studied the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology. And then before I'd finished, I started my own wellbeing and coaching practice. And that's how I ended up where I am today. I've been doing that this is year 4.
Fantastic. And coaching with the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology is such a natural transition and complementation, I suppose, as well.
And Julie, you recently wrote an incredible article about the power of personal stories and how they can shape our lives and impact our well-being. And we're wondering if you could share the importance of how our inner stories might shape us and impact us.
Sure, Leanne. So obviously who we are and what we do are influenced by the stories we tell about ourselves. And we have this little inner voice that's going all the time about who we are and what our story is, our narrative, if you like. And these stories, and particularly if you have a dominant story, can become the lens through which we see and interpret our lives. So it isn't a static thing. Obviously, we're creating and revising our narrative identity as we go forward. But it's how we frame our story that shapes how we perceive ourselves and how we convey to others who we are now, how we got here, and where we think our lives might be going in future. So if you like, I'm quite visual, so I'm always using visual metaphors. So I was thinking knitting. So we knit together these various autobiographical events and episodes that occur in our lives into a sort of evolving and integrative story of life, our life. And that gives us a degree of unity and purpose and meaning. And you ask about the impact. The impact is that immense, I guess, because the stories we construct about ourselves can become, and usually do, how we live because of that story.
Mm.
I can see how that would have influence on shaping us when we, you could take the same scenario for two people, and one person could have that really optimistic view of how they meet that challenge, and the other person might be seeing it as always challenge, always doom and gloom, and I guess you carry yourself very differently in both of those lenses.
Absolutely. And we hear it. We hear it in other people's stories too.
Mm.
And, I guess we can all think of people we've worked with, etc., who always seem to have bad things happen to them because they're always, maybe because or maybe not, but
Yeah.
they're always talking about a negative storyline, I guess. So
Yeah,
I
and
can
there
think
is,
back to people from years ago, that seem to always be talking about this happened and then this bad event, and it seemed to be a narrative fabric.
yeah. And it's interesting the threads that go through those stories. They do continually loop that negativity bias back in, or that pessimism, I guess. And it's almost like they quite enjoy that, or they haven't got the skills yet to actually move them into a different perspective.
Well, it's hard, I guess, because, and I was going to mention this later, but I'll mention it now, as Rick Hansen says, our mind is like Velcro for the negative.
Yeah.
And so if that's where we start directing our attention and paying a lot of attention to it, it narrows our frame of reference so that becomes sort of the defining structure, I guess, for how we perceive our story and ourselves.
Rather than broaden and build our capacity to be able to have better narratives that are going to serve us, better.
Yeah, that are generative.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I've got another little question for you here, Julie. Are you able to share some ways that people construct their stories and why they might support us?
Yes. So, as I've just sort of said, the events that occur in our lives, particularly those that have really stood out for us, become the fabric of our storyline. And we always have positive and negative events that occur in our lives, but it's about where we focus and how we link the stories together that creates the storyline. So to give you an example, I suppose if we think of our stories as having the capacity to harm us or help us, that can become a problem or it can become a hopeful possibility.
Yeah.
So if you have someone who goes around in their head with a sort of a headline for their story of I'm a lone survivor, that's the replay that's going on. I've, survived all these things and I've had to do it all by myself. That actually is quite restrictive compared to someone who says, I'm a resourceful explorer. I go forward and I overcome what I find in my way. So, and there's obviously wellbeing impacts for whichever story that you choose and that you invest. Obviously, the environments that we are in too can mean other people can impact the stories we tell by telling us what we are or how useless we are or whatever else it might be as well. So it's not just us, it's always context as well. So we're the author of our own stories, our life stories. And as autonomous humans, we choose what we focus on. And we can rewrite our story, sometimes with assistance, and influence what becomes possible for us in the future as a result.
Absolutely. I was just thinking of, the stories where they're sort of almost on a cycle, or, like that elevator that just goes over and over in a loop. It can actually almost ripple onto other people as well, as a way that you may not even notice, but it could definitely make you feel, that might be me as well.
And I suppose I'm just thinking about, positive energizers and the opposite, because that will attract or repel people, I guess, depending on how much that story is articulated and gone over and played out.
You can see that even in a community, Julie. Some communities are really proud of the story that they have behind them as one of, yes, they've had challenges, but this is how we've managed them and met them, as opposed to another that might be focused on, you mentioned that lone survivor kind of scenario. I can see how that could impact the story that one tells themselves, whether that be a person, a workplace, or a community. It would definitely change the direction of the paths that you might take because of that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah. Julie, you talk about the contamination story and redemption story. Can you share your insights into the difference between these two?
Yeah, sure, Leanne. So the contamination story, if we come back to the knitting, gathers up the threads of events that haven't gone well, and particularly emotionally negative events, and sort of tells us, weaves the tale that these have ruined a good, emotionally positive life. So there's been a fouling or a negating of life because of these experiences, or this experience, or this trauma. And I'm not making light of trauma, obviously. And I suppose that contamination story then can become the lens through which we define our future. And the opposite story is more a redemption story where, yeah, sure, bad things happen, negative things have happened that have needed to be overcome. However, it's a different focus. It's the focus of, yes, and I got through those with strength, with growth, with resilience, with learning, and I can now go forward with much more sort of hopeful sense of possibility and growth. So that's how they're different.
Yeah. And I can see how, when we think about these stories, and whichever lens you choose, I think, time and time again, we in our conversations, we've talked to people often will share the power of the other person, and how that impacts, like the weaving story that you do, the knitting story that you share. I'm just seeing the connection, and I'm hoping I'm making sense as I say this, because I think I'm having a bit of a light bulb moment in that that I'm seeing it. I see how that happens, and how we can then craft the story around everything that's in our environment, and influencing that. Because if I have a negative thought, I'm thinking, if I have a challenge and I have a negative thought, I do have certain people that I will go to speak to as my support teams, as my champions, because I know they're going to provide perspective and advice that is optimistic, as opposed to going down the hole with you.
Yeah. So there is that potential to actively work towards reshaping your story.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when you have your champions with you, they can also help you in when they hear a story that you've just shared. They can say, well, that's not how we see you. And then they can highlight your strengths or the things that you naturally do. Often we have our own, yes, that negative bias pops up when we're saying that we can't do something. In actual fact, we've already done that before and we can get advice for, which I guess is why the importance of coaching comes into the conversation, because it's really another perspective and sounding board, I guess, to really unpack some of those, the thinking really behind the story and how that was created.
Yep.
So that might be a really good segue into, Julie, is, do you have any coaching techniques or interventions or interventions that could help to reframe those stories or narratives to be more generative and positive that would serve us a little bit better?
So I've got an example actually from this week that I can give you, but just sort of generally speaking, I use a lot of solution-focused coaching and techniques in my coaching. And I really like the aspect of solutions focus, which is future perfect and the miracle question, as a way to shift focus towards a different narrative. Now, obviously, when people come to coaching, there's no agenda on my part or necessarily on their part to say, I want to shift my life story and my narrative that goes with it. However, they're working usually towards a goal or some sort of end outcome that is positive and that will contribute to greater possibility and a different or a more qualitatively rich future. So this week, and it's the example, I was coaching a client who's had a series of, obviously I have to be careful about what I say, but really difficult and challenging events occur in her life, particularly over the last 6 months, including a very major life event just a couple of months ago, less than 2 months ago. And in our coaching, once we'd established what she wanted, which in fact was a new identity, a new Sarah, if you like, and that's obviously not her name, we spent time unpacking and really fleshing out the details of what that looked like, of what this new Sarah looked like. And the miracle question, which is about that question about, okay, you go to bed tonight and you fall asleep and overnight a miracle occurs and you wake up tomorrow and you're already there. You've already got the new identity. What would be, and there's a whole series of questions, but I'll give you some examples. What would be the first tiny signs that you notice something's different? What would that look like? What would that feel like? What would you say differently? How would you behave differently? What would you notice about yourself? What would other people notice about you? What about your family? What about your husband? What about your dog, maybe? What about the people you work with? What does that look like? And so people go through a process of really, I suppose, almost projecting themselves into their, in that case, new identity, and really come up with a very concrete sense of what it is that they're working towards and what that is like. And from that, she came up with this wonderful visual picture or metaphor to carry forward, which was a visual image that even sort of described the look on her face and where she was and how she was looking and where she was looking. And like that is very powerful for her to then take forward as a picture of her new identity as an ongoing touchstone. And, something that we will keep front and center in our coaching sessions as we continue.
I'm inspired just hearing that.
So am I. And it brings that positive emotion straight in, doesn't it? Just gone, oh, Love that. And when you have the metaphor, the power of that, it can change your rewiring in your brain and takes you right away in that negative bias to just so much more.
Yep.
Mm.
And you
Yeah.
can see that the well-being impacts of that.
Yeah.
You know, you are far likely to have better psychological well-being if you've
Yeah.
got that to aspire towards. You're likely to be able to have a more buoyant sense of self-esteem and, you know, a lower likelihood of anxiety and depression because you are actually sort of striving towards
You can
your
see
own
pathways,
identity.
can't you? You can, like, it's that hope, it's almost like that hope theory that's opening up pathways for us to see new and generative ways. But I think the coaching component is really almost bursting opening that seed of possibility. That's just incredible. And the fact that she has owned that whole process for herself to see herself in a different identity and what that looks like means that she's got the pathways to be able to develop that moving forward. That's just amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's beautiful. Thanks,
No
Jill.
problem. And I think it's the safety also and the trust that you create in those environments that can elicit that or, you know, enable people to elicit that for themselves. It's not something that you're necessarily going to be able to, you know, think about on Friday night after 5 o'clock. You know, it's sort of a very different sort of environment where you can really sort of, I suppose, think deeply about yourself and where you're going. I mean, that's an example.
Yeah, and I guess it's that psychological safety, isn't it, in an environment such as that? And gee, you must have a really great seat to sit in. Of course, you know, at times in front of you, I'm sure that there are some real challenges. But just knowing how I feel right now, having heard those questions, there must be some real breakthrough moments of seeing that person come to life with that vision that they're creating.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It's well, I love what I do. What can I say? But yeah, it's a very profound responsibility, but it's also a wonderful sense of being able to serve other humans in terms of being able to create circumstances where they can generate better possibilities and more hopeful futures and really invest in growing their quality of life.
It's almost a little bit of a privilege, isn't it, to sit, to watch and be with that person, for them to co-create or just create on their own the possibilities. It's, you know, such a privilege. Yeah.
It really is. It's a good word.
Julie, we're so grateful for the time that you're sharing with us. Based on our conversation today, do you have a book, a podcast, or TED Talk, or something that you might recommend to listeners today that they might be able to find out more about or you know, explore? And of course, we'll share that in our notes today.
Sure. So I've got two. One is sort of the potted version for very busy people who just want the next layer. So there's a YouTube video that is called Change Your Story, Change Your Life, that is about narrative psychology. And the link for that, Leanne, was in the article. So these are ones from the article because they are ones that I really, you know, bank on. And the other one for people who want to dive deeper and who are really interested, perhaps for themselves, quite apart from any professional role that they might play, it's the most delightful book called Retelling the Stories of Our Lives by a psychologist from South Australia called David Dunsborough. And that is a really precious book. I love it. And it's very practical. If you are really interested in the topic, I would highly recommend it.
Lovely. Thank you. That's something I'm curious about and I would love to add to my reading list. So thank you.
Julie, just wondering if you have your own favourite wellbeing strategy or a toolkit or tool that you like to use that you could recommend to our listeners. Based on the stories that we tell ourselves, or you might tell yourself? What do you do? And how might we reframe those stories that are definitely going to help us better?
Sure. So this is one I have done myself, and I also, again, I did put it in the article. I threw everything at that.
That was a great article.
There's a reason why. And that is, how mindful writing is a form of reflective journaling.
Yeah.
And it's explained as option 2 in my newsletter, but it takes you through a 10-minute written exercise where you actually think about an event or events that you've needed to overcome in your life, real events. And there are a whole series of prompt questions that you write about to actually sort of work through and distill from those aspects of strength, growth and resilience that you have taken from those events that have occurred in your life. And what I like about that, and I've done this exercise myself, and I found it quite surprising really, because there's only about 5 questions or so, and you sort of think, oh, is that really going to make a difference? But if you get into it, you can really sort of think about having to sort of focus on the good things, the things that really helped you grow, that actually were resourcing for you, I guess.
Yeah.
And that really generated where you've gotten to is a really useful and impactful experience, I think, and it really gave me, and hopefully it gives others if people do it in 10 minutes, quite a hopeful perspective.
Yeah, and very reflective. I had a look at those questions in that article and had a little go myself, and I put a tricky situation in, and it was wonderful. And Leanne and I have done a lot of this sort of conversation together where you just all of a sudden you go, oh gosh, this is going to be hard. But then all of a sudden it's actually so generative that you go, oh, look at these accomplishments I've actually been able to do. And this has actually made me much more resilient and to stand up for myself or whatever it might be. It's actually transformative. So that's a wonderful, wonderful strategy. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Yes, thank you.
It's sort of like you gather them into you, and you think, oh wow, that's so cool. I managed to actually take really good things out of that. And that's made me stronger. It's made me more hopeful. It's made me, or it's enabled me to do other things because I've built those muscles. So, yeah.
And I guess when we get caught in those stories, just going back to the conversation that we've had and, telling the stories that we tell ourselves and that impact how we show up, there might be different life events where the story might be different from time to time. And when we're overwhelmed with that, perhaps a contamination story, that's when we forget those things that have got us to where we are today. So this is such a beautiful exercise in being able to uncover that and have it there to remind you of those times.
Or even, Leanne, to do it again.
Lovely.
It's not a sort of a time limited thing, because there are different periods in our lives and I wouldn't sort of put a time limit on it, but it isn't necessarily a once-off thing. If it's been really helpful at one time, life goes on. A whole lot of new events occur, and it's handy to have in your back pocket to sort of pull out and say, actually, this might be a really useful thing for me to do at this point.
Yeah.
Even if it shifts just a little bit, it just starts to open the lens up.
There's quite a lot of research in that writing that down as well. Often when we start writing, it's really tricky to start with, and then all of a sudden, all these wonderful things almost come out of your subconscious mind. And that's, I think, what's so beneficial. I remember when we did our Masters of Applied Positive Psychology and they talked about write about your best self. I'm like, oh, really? Oh, really? Come on. Anyway, it took a long time, and all of a sudden I was writing all these amazing things, and I went, oh, and it's like I had feathers or something all fluffing up.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I hadn't experienced that before.
It's beautiful.
And we don't unless we sort of have have a reason to do it. We don't necessarily sit down and just think,
No.
oh, got nothing better to do. I'll just write about my best self, or
Yes.
I'll write about, the experiences I've overcome.
Love
Yeah.
it. Julie, here we are at the end of a lovely conversation. We both have really enjoyed speaking with you today. As we wrap up this episode, if people want to move forward with exploring this a little bit more, where's the best place for people to find out more about you and the wonderful work that you're doing? And of course, we'll add this into the show notes so people can find you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Leanne. So if you go to qualogenic.com, you can have the spelling in the
Definitely.
notes. It's just QOL, Qualogenic. So you can find me on my website, qualogenic.com, or on LinkedIn as my profile, just Julie Weste with an E on the end. And the other thing that if people are interested in reading about my writing and the articles that I write, perhaps subscribe to the Resourceful Coach newsletter on LinkedIn as well.
Well, thank you so much. And I'm going to be checking in on my stories this next week and make sure that they are not contamination ones, but more redemption ones.
Right. Well, thanks so much. I
Thank
really
you.
enjoyed it.
Oh, what a lovely conversation, Lisa. And just that whole perspective around the stories that we tell ourselves. What did she say? A redemption story or a
Contamination
story?
Oh,
I can think of stories I've heard in both categories, and the different way I feel just hearing those stories.
That was the same with me. When I read her article that highlighted that, I was actually thinking how it's so easy in a way to have those contamination stories. It's almost like a fuel of negativity that people just love and embellish, but it doesn't make you feel good. And then the immediate, redemption story just changes your perspective completely.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden that you feel that joy and excitement, and it's more generative. I really love that.
So what was one of your key takeaways, Lisa?
I think for me about those hopeful possibilities, that when we are more focused, it's like that attention. The more attention we put into those generative sort of story, redemption stories, there's more possibilities and opportunities to see things differently and in much more of a positive lens rather than the negative struggle all the time. And I really like that she addressed that, I guess, the elephant in the room, where life is not always positive. There are things that go on, and I've had a situation today where things have been really, really tough, and I can choose to sit in that contamination phase and tell the stories in that, or I can actually flip that into a much more generative story about wonderful things that happened and memories and so forth.
Yeah.
I just really love the hopeful possibility that she talked about.
I love how you put hopeful possibilities. Throughout the conversation, there were different things that I was thinking of in that, yes, I can see that's growth mindset there.
Yeah.
You mentioned throughout the conversation around that hope theory, around finding those pathways of possibility and just uncovering them is amazing. Being able to find a way through the challenge.
Well, that's like her miracle question that she used in her coaching. So that strategy, that wellbeing strategy, really helped to shift the challenges that clients might have in their identity about perhaps shifting, well, this is where I am now, but where do I want to be? So what does that look like? So it's that forward focusing about what it could be, so that you're generating your own thoughts and your own story about where I want to be, how do I want to show up. So who am I really, rather than what is it, not what I do, but who do I want to be? Who am I should say.
It's an appreciative focus, really, isn't
Definitely.
it? When we think about it, and creating that vision. I was with her as she was sort of going through that. I was thinking, yes, a conversation like that brings you to life.
Well, it also having a coach to help you,
Yes.
helps inspire you and challenge you
Yes.
to actually create what that's like.
Yes.
So, the first question that she sort of said is, if a miracle happened tonight and everything that you want for yourself and your identity for your future is actually going to happen. So what is the first sign that this might happen? Like, what is happening?
Yeah.
And then what does it look like? Does it sound like? What does it feel like? How are you behaving? So all of a sudden, all those questions, extra little questions or prompts, are helping you to really make a visual of where you want to be, so you can put that out as, this is who I am and this is how I want to be, and show up every day. And even just asking the prompts of, well, what are you noticing about yourself? What are the families that are, so this is still all imaginary. It's that, miracle questions added for you to be able to build a metaphor or a picture or a visual of where you want to be, rather than being stuck.
Yeah. Like she says, we're the author of our own story.
Yeah, definitely. And you can choose the story.
I'm going forward today with inspired thinking.
And wonderful stories. Have a good one.
Okay.
Take care, everyone.
Okay, bye for now.
And thank you for listening to the Imperfect Us podcast. As always, we are extremely grateful to our executive producer, Brenton Ainsworth, for helping us to put this episode together. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with someone you care about, and we would be grateful if you could rate this podcast on iTunes. To continue the conversation and see what we're up to, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Just search for Imperfect Us. Bye for now.